Hello, my name is Lee Taylor, and I really like to knit, so much so that some of my friends call me the Knitwit. I hope you enjoyed today's video and possibly even learned something. So let's get started. Hello and welcome to Knit Bits number 20. First and foremost, I've got my tooth back. I get my full crown the week before Thanksgiving, so I've just got this temporary, but I'm so glad to have my tooth back. Now, back over to Knit Bits. We are on number 20, and we have lots to talk about. We're going to be doing two separate swatches together. I've already got them started. We're going to be doing the bamboo and the twisted cable. We are going to be looking at and talking about 4 of my project updates, and we're going to be talking about some points. I've got 4 points to talk about, and that section is just going to be just basically jibber jabber. There's really not anything to show. We're just going to talk as we kind of knit along. So let's get going into this week's video. I'm excited to not only have my tooth, but to be able to have a video for you this week. So let's jump straight in. First up, we're going to be going over a Swatch Lab. We're going to be going over 2 different swatches. One, we're going to be doing the bamboo, or sometimes called the pillar stitch. I prefer bamboo because bamboo is a personal favorite plant of mine. And then we are also going to be going over what I learned as a twisted cable stitch. Some people call a mock cable, and some call simply a right twist. So let's go ahead and jump straight into it and take a look at these swatches. We are going to be taking a look at the bamboo stitch, also called the pillar stitch, in our first section on the Swatch Lab. And I actually have an example of a project where I use that on. It's actually this hat here behind me. So let me grab that first, and we can take a look and talk about this. So this hat here features the bamboo stitch. Some people call this the pillar stitch, but you can see why it would be called the bamboo stitch because, first of all, this is in green, but it can be worked in any color. But these columns up, these pillars, look like the stalks of the bamboo, and then you've got these little cross sections which represents the little nodes of bamboo. So this was one of the first hats I knit, and as you can see, I used the method where I just knit a rectangle, sewed it up, and then just used the yarn that I used to knit with, and I just wound around the top to make this little pom-pom. A jumbo hat. It's very, very warm. So I'm just going to put this back up here. Whoops. Okay. Now let's switch over to the overhead and take a look on how to work the bamboo stitch, also known as the pillar stitch. In this first Swatch Lab segment, we're going to be knitting this bamboo stitch. I've done it in 2 different ways, where you knit it regular and as ribbing, so you can see the differences. The hat that I showed you was knit this way. So let's jump in and take a look and see how we knit this. It is sometimes called the bamboo stitch. Other times books will call this the pillar stitch. So let's jump in and work this together. So what I did here is I did my long tail cast on, which is what I almost always use. Knit 2 rows, and then I started the pattern, and I've flanked it on either side with just 3 garter stitches, and then the pattern in between those. I did want to show how to work it if you wanted to work just it solid like I did in the hat, or if you wanted to incorporate that in a form of ribbing. You can see how that is worked as well. I chose 2x2 ribbing. You could substitute any style of ribbing with this, any variant. So let's go ahead and get started on this. So first up, we're just going to knit the edge stitches here, which is just knitting. And so here's our little edge stitches. Now then, I would recommend when you knit this pattern to use a slightly larger size needle than what you normally would. It does tend to get a little tight. That could be the way I'm knitting it, I'm not sure. But when you swatch, try swatching with a few different size needles and see what kind of fabric you like in this. So first up, we've knit our edge stitches. Now we need to do a yarn over. Okay? Now we are going to knit 2 stitches. 1 and 2. Now we do not want to increase, so we need to get rid of that yarn over. So what we're going to do is we're going to use our left hand needle, and we're going to go put our needle into where we can pick up that yarn over, like so. Okay? Then we're going, I put my thumb there just to grab hold of it. Then we're going to slip that yarn over both stitches. So like we're binding off that first stitch over 2, okay? So take that yarn over both stitches, okay? That is what makes that horizontal bar. So we are now ready to work the next one right behind the other one. So what we've got to do is we've got to do our yarn over and knit 2 stitches. 1 and 2. Now, once again, we don't want that increase. We want to make the horizontal bar on using that yarn over stitch. So we're going to use our left hand needle, pick up that yarn over, and I'm picking it up with the left hand needle like so. Okay, I'm not going behind as if to knit, I'm going as if I was going to purl with this one. Okay, and we're going to, again, I put my thumb over that to keep it on the needle. And if you want, you can take your other finger and kind of hold onto these if you find that helps. A little bit more peace of mind when you've got both of these anchored, that you're not accidentally going to drop stitches. Which simply means the stitch you're working falls off the needle and you have not worked it, and it's just free there, and it could potentially drop down multiple rows, which is called laddering, which you don't want in this scenario. So we're going to pick up that yarn over again, and we're going to lift it up and over and slip it over those 2 stitches that we worked, okay? So the yarn over counts as stitch 1, then the 2 stitches, so 2 and 3, and we're picking up that yarn over and lifting them over stitches 2 and 3, so it makes that horizontal bar, and we have not added stitches, okay? Do that one more time here. Work a yarn over, okay? Knit 2 stitches. 1 and 2, and then take your left hand needle and pick up that yarn over. Secure your stitches if you want to, and you're going to lift that yarn over those 2 stitches that you knit, like so. That creates the horizontal bar, and those 2 stitches makes that column of stitches like so. Okay, easy to do. I first did it, I was still a relatively new knitter. I had knit a few years before I used this, but I didn't knit very often, so I was still a relatively new knitter. And this can definitely be done by a beginner, or at the very least an advanced, or not an advanced, an adventurous knitter. Okay, so that is how you work that. This is not one of those where you can substitute knits for purls. It will not come out the exact same. You can do the same method, just be aware that you're not going to get this result. So that is if you want to work them consecutively, okay, like I did in the hat. That's how I did that. Now, if you want to do it in ribbing, I did 2x2 ribbing, so we're going to purl 2 stitches in my particular pattern, or sample swatch, purl 2 stitches. Now then, when you are transitioning from a purl to a knit and you want to yarn over, instead of putting the yarn to the back like you would regularly, you just leave it in front. Because when you go to knit, see how that crosses over that needle and makes that extra stitch like a yarn over. So when you knit, you now have that extra yarn over stitch. Okay, so we knit 2 stitches, and we're going to work it the exact same as we did before. I'm going to pick up that yarn over. So use your fingers if you have to manipulate. My hands are a little shaky today, so they're not one to work quite so easily. Secure the stitches if you need to, and just lift that yarn over up and over those 2 stitches, like so. And you have worked the bamboo or pillar stitch. And then for mine, we're going to bring the yarn in front, purl 2, and we are going to work a final bamboo or pillar stitch. And so to yarn over, we are just going to leave our yarn in front from our purling and just simply knit the 2 stitches. Knit these 2 stitches and then slip, or pass that yarn over those other 2 stitches. I went off screen. Let me do that again. Grab that yarn over and slip it up and over those 2 stitches. Okay? Oh, I dropped a stitch. Let me undo what I've just done here. Okay, so our yarn is in front. We're going to knit 2 stitches. And I've twisted that one, so I'm just going to knit that one through the back loop to fix that. Twisted stitch is simply when the stitch is swapped on the needle, where instead of the front leg coming off this way, the leading leg is off the back. I talked about that in a previous video, and I will link to that down below. So now we're going to take our yarn over, and it is trickier to pick up a yarn over coming from the purl than it is from the knit, but it is doable. It's just a little bit fiddlier. There we go. And secure the stitches so they don't drop like I did on the last one, and just lift that up and over those 2 stitches, like so. Okay, and these needles are grabbier than most, and so that when you see me, it kind of shakes. It is simply because the needles are grabbier, and so it's taking a little bit more force than usual to manipulate these stitches. So now we are going to knit to the end, and then we'll take a look and see what it is we've got. Okay, so now let's look at this more up closely. And I'm going to zoom in here. Okay, in this section, you see that definite column and the horizontal bars that look like bamboo, or again, as some call, a pillar stitch. When you do it in the ribbing, however, things change. It looks differently. Instead of getting that prominent with the here, the prominent column with the horizontal, you're seeing everything, and instead of it laying flat, it's laying at a diagonal. So it's harder to see. If you pull it down, you can see that column, but it wants to go like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. Just be aware that if you're putting it in these in between these purls to make ribbing, it may not look like that. It may look a little bit more like that. Now when you go to block it, you can work on getting that, but that's just the nature of knits and purls working together, that it just kind of wants to curl, and that's what's happening here. You're getting the same result characteristically or in function. It's just presenting and showing itself in a different way. This right here could easily twist, and it would look the exact same twisted on its diagonal than it is standing out proud like that. So it's worked the same way, but you get two different results. Now let's work this on the back side, or the wrong side. So I'm going to zoom back out a little bit so it's easier to work these. And we are going to knit our selvage edges to keep it in garter. Okay, now we are going to move our marker out of the way. And we are going to work this as any other ribbing. If it looks like a purl, we're going to purl it. If it looks like a knit, we're going to knit it. So these two are purled. So we need to bring the yarn to the front and purl these 2 stitches. Okay, it is going to be snug because you've got 2 stitches that's been compressed together with that yarn flipped over. So be aware, and that's why I said use larger size needles, because these are compressed because they are now bound by a belt. So it does make them a little bit more snug. So just be aware of that when you are knitting this. It's not bad because it's snug, it's just the nature of this particular stitch. And we purl that one. Next in our ribbing, we've got 2 knit stitches, so we knit those. Again, you can do this in the ribbing in any one if you want 1 by 1, 2 by 2, etc. Which I will link to a video down below where I showed you how to do 1 by 1 and 2 by 2, as well as seed stitch. So next we've got 2 purl stitches. So we are going to purl these 2. These were the 2 from the bamboo, so they may be a little bit snug. So just be aware of that when you work them. And then finally, next we have 2 knits. This is the end of our ribbing section. Okay, so if you are working the bamboo stitch in ribbing, that is how you will do that. If you are working the bamboo stitch consecutively like this, on the wrong side, you are going to purl across. Okay, so bring the yarn to the front and purl across. Very simple and easy to do. Especially when your hands don't try and fight you. That always makes things easier when they cooperate. Okay. The last purl. Now I'm going to take the yarn to the back because we're going to end this off with garter as usual. Slip your stitch, or your, not stitch, slip your marker if you're using one, and knit to the end. There we go. Now we can turn this around and see what it is we've got. So there is it's simply a 2-row repeat where you are going to do work a yarn over, knit 2 stitches, and then you're going to slip that yarn over those 2 stitches. And if you do it consecutively, you just repeat that across. If you're going to do ribbing, then you just work your purl stitches in between. Then on your next row, which is on the wrong side, you're just going to purl across the consecutive and work as they present in ribbing across that segment if you're going to do that. Personally, I like it better consecutively. So you yarn over, knit 2, yarn over, knit 2, pass the yarn over the 2 stitches, and then you just repeat that across. And then on the wrong side, you purl all the way across. You could work a couple of extra rows in between these repeats, but the actual pattern is a 2-row repeat, which means you repeat those 2 rows, right side and wrong side, over and over and over again to get your pattern. Next, let's take a look at our other swatch. Next up in Swatch Lab, we are going to be taking a look at what some call a mock cable, some may call a twisted cable stitch, and some may simply refer to it as a right twist. It is not a full cable. Cable being where you take stitches and move them across each other. That is not, we're not doing that. Next video is going to be almost exclusively about cables, so stay tuned for that. We are going to be doing a Swatch Lab together. I've already got it started, but it is what I learned it as the twisted cable stitch. But it's very easy to do. I knit an entire scarf out of it, and I can show you that. I've got that right here. So these look very similar to cables. I only worked them in the gray section because you couldn't see it in the black. But do you see how this kind of twists and it looks like some stitches cross over other ones? Well, that's not entirely what's going on. This is not a true cable. Again, cable is where you're taking these stitches and you're passing them over other stitches to where they kind of crisscross back and forth. I'm not doing that on this. This is a form of a mock cable or a fake cable. You get a very similar result in appearance, but there are some differences. So again, we're going to be going over cables in depth next video. So let's go ahead and switch over to the overhead and take a look at how you work this swatch. Let's take a look at this twisted stitch, or twisted cable, I'm sorry, twisted cable stitch is what I learned it as. Others will call it a mock cable, and still others will call this simply a right twist. This is not a true cable where stitches are being worked over other stitches. More on that in another video. This is a way of getting a similar looking result without doing all the muss and fuss of this. This particular pattern that I'm showing you today is a 4-row repeat, which means you're working 2 right side rows and 2 wrong side rows. So you're working 4 rows before you start the pattern over again. Whereas in this bamboo stitch, it was simply a 2-row repeat. There are some that are even like a 20 or 30 row repeat. So if you hear that row repeat, that's what that means. You're working X number of rows before you work the same pattern over and over and over again. So this one is a 4-row repeat. A lot of people will do these right twists as a 2-row repeat. I don't like that because it pushes them so far together that you don't get the same effect that I get in this. I work these in a 2x2 ribbing. You could work this in another style of ribbing, but you do need 2 stitches in this twist section. So let's go ahead and just jump in and get started knitting this. Okay, this is very, very easy to do. I have given you all of the tools already on how to do this. Now we're just going to be putting pieces together. So first off, we're going to knit our selvage, which is just a 3 garter or 3 knit stitches where worked in garter. So now then, we're going to slip our little marker if you're using one, and I've got 2 purl stitches here because I'm working this in 2x2 ribbing. So we're going to purl these next 2 stitches. Like so. Okay, now then, on these next 2 stitches, let me get my yarn sorted around my hand there. There we go. On these next 2 stitches here, this is where we're going to work our little bit of knitting magic here. We're going to knit those 2 together, like so, which I've taught you how to do and I'll link to down below. Now then, before you slide these off the needles, leave them in place here. Take your right needle up and insert into that first stitch like you're going to knit, okay? Like that. Now knit that stitch, like so. Okay? Now you're going to slide these 2 stitches right off the needle. And that is what makes that twist. You're knitting and just working your stitches in such a way that you're sneakily making it look like a cable without actually cabling. So let's go, and we're going to purl 2 stitches over to our next one. Again, you can work different numbers of purls in between and get different results if you like. So we're at these 2 and we want a twist right here. Whether it be a twisted cable stitch, a right twist, or a mock cable, different terminology gets you the same result here. So what we're going to do is we're going to knit these 2 stitches together. Okay, so that's step 1. Knit those stitches together. Leave them on the left hand needle. Okay, pull out your right needle, pull out some slack here, and go back into that first stitch. Okay, and knit that first stitch like so. Now you're going to take those 2 stitches here that we worked together as a knit 2 together, and we're going to slip that off. So what we've done here is we've done a decrease where we knit 2 together, but then we've done an increase where we knit into that first stitch twice, all in the same segment. So we are decreasing and increasing here, and that's what gives you this twist appearance. So now let's work these 2 purl stitches like so, and let's work our twist again. So yarn to the back. Over these 2 stitches here, we're going to knit those 2 together. That is the decrease portion. Now we're going to leave these stitches on this left needle for now, pull out some slack, and go into that first stitch and knit that 1. Again, that is our increase, like so, and that has worked the twist. Now we're going to purl these last 2 stitches, and that is done. So now we can slip our marker and work our selvage, which is in garter, so we are going to knit them just like that. You may want to pause and rewind this segment and look at this, how to work this again. I did do multiple, so I can kind of repeat it back and forth, but I did not want to do it where there were like 10 across and it become monotonous to other people. So if you need to rewind and watch this again, definitely feel free to do so. And at the bottom, you can check for the little gear icon and click that, and you can also reduce the speed if that helps you also. Now then, on the wrong side, we are simply going to knit these stitches as they present, which is what you do in all forms of ribbing. And we're just going to knit that across. Or work it across, I should say, rather. Some are knits and some are purls. So here we've got 2 knit stitches, so we're going to knit those. Here we have our, where we did our twist, and it looks a little funky. It just has that bar across both of them, and all that means is you're going to purl those 2 stitches. So bring the yarn to the front and purl those 2 stitches. Very simple and easy to do. Next we're going to knit these 2, and we're going to work that all the way across, where we knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2 all the way across, and ending with our 3 knit selvage. This is a good way of adding a little bit of character to an otherwise boring 2x2 ribbing. You can spice things up, and just little somethings you can add adds a little bit of flavor to your projects. Okay, and then we're going to end off with our 3 knit stitches. Now then, back to the right side. In my swatch pattern here, I told you I like to do a 4-row repeat on these, so that way the crossings are a little bit more obvious. All that means is that first row we did our twist. Our second row was the wrong side, so we just worked across the stitches. Our third row is we are going to again work these stitches as they present, and row 4 is on the wrong side and work the stitches as they present. So we've worked a right side, it's row 1, row 2 was the wrong side, row 3 is a right side, and row 4 is a wrong side. When you get done with that last wrong side, row 4, then you are simply going to work row 1 all over again and start the repeat over. That is how you work these. I'm not going to work these others on camera. I've already shown you how to do the 2x2 ribbing, and rows 3 and 4 are simply working 2x2 ribbing. So there's no need to show that on camera. Now again, you can work these on 2x2 or 2-row repeats, where you work your twist on row 1, row 2 is you're knitting the wrong side, and then you start over and you work a twist again. That gives you a different looking fabric. I don't care for that personally. Now there may be applications where I do want that. You can also choose to work where this and this is twisted, but this is not. Then on this next segment, this one and this one is not, but this one is. So you're staggering out where you do your twists, and so that can give a different result as well. There's a lot of ways of utilizing this, but I just wanted to show you the action row, which is the row 1. Action row means is where you're doing something different than what you normally are doing. So the action row is you're knitting 2 together, leaving them on the needle, then knitting into that first stitch again, and then sliding everything off. Then on the wrong side, you're just working that as it presents, just like regular 2x2 ribbing. And then that is how you work the twisted cable stitch, the right twist, or the mock cable. Different names for the same result. In the project update section, we're going to be going over 4 projects, looking at 2 and talking about 2. First up, we're going to be taking a look at my school socks that I'm knitting. Next, we're going to be talking about Nebula. Next, we're going to be talking about the Santa Gnome, the 3rd and final one. And last, we're going to talk about one of my Christmas knits. I cannot show you that, but we will talk about it. So let's jump over and take a look at these projects. First up in project updates, we're going to be taking a look at school socks, which I'm using this yarn to knit with. I did frog it and restarted it because I wanted to start the princess sole right at the very beginning of the toe. That's what it looks like on the back and the front. So we will jump over to the overhead and take a look at this more up close, in depth, and intimate. As mentioned in the overview, here is the school socks. I've got just all of my needle or markers that I'm going to need for the project just clipped on. This marker shows where the sub-project ended. That's the toe section. I'm now working on the foot. And so I just clipped all of these. I'm going to mark every 10 rows with these yellow markers. I do not feel the need to mark which side is the right side and which side is the wrong side on the needle because I've got that one there. Also, they look vastly different, so there's no way of confusing which side is which. If you feel like doing a right side marker, that's perfectly fine. But what I'm doing here is this was a rounded toe, rounded barn toe, and it's just worked, you know, just regular. I'm not going into how to work this toe. I may do that on a future video, but not this one. This one I'm just talking about what I've done here. So this side is knit regular, where you knit all of these stitches. But on the back side, which is called the sole, S-O-L-E, I am purling across, which puts the knit side on the inside, and that's where your foot's going to step down on, which is called a princess sole, and that is simply to make the inside smoother. So if you have sensitive feet, this could be a good option for you. It's not necessary, but I have knit a regular sock, and now I just want to do the princess sole and see if that helps. You could absolutely knit the entire sock with the purls outside where the smooth side is inside. Entirely possible. A lot of different options that you can do. But I just wanted to go over, I am knitting on the foot portion. This top section up here, okay, so let me do it this way here. This goes to the ground, or to the floor, and that's called your sole, the sole of your foot. The top portion of your foot is called your instep, okay? So the instep, I'm working knits. The sole, I'm working purls. This is what I've gotten done with the school socks. Again, I frogged back to where this purl section started right at the toe. Previously, it started just with the foot section, and I wanted to go ahead and start it right at the very beginning. So that is my progress update on school socks. Next up, we're going to be talking about the Nebula Shawl. My frogger frogged it for me yesterday, I believe it was. All my days have run together this week. So I have the yarn. This is Chicken Lady Fiber Arts Surma Bamboo in the colorway Blurple, and I will link to her website down in the description below. So I did frog it. I'm going to knit it on larger needles, 6.5 millimeter or 10.5 US to be precise. So this is the project that I'm going to work on throughout the month of December. So I won't be talking about this anymore this month, but stay tuned, and starting next month, I'm going to knit this through the month just like I did Warding Spell throughout the month of October. Because my gift knitting should be done by the end of November. Fingers crossed. If not, then I'll start this whenever I get done with the last gift. Next up in the project update section, we are going to be talking about the third and final Santa Gnome. I will show pictures of all three together, and we will be taking a look at this. I did knit this same size needles as the other ones, but I knit them with a different needle material. And yes, I know that jingle is annoying, and I was so glad to be done with these Santa Gnomes because the jingle goes on almost the entire time I'm knitting, and it starts grating by the time it gets to the end. I'm a jolly person, but that was getting too much. So, like I said, same size needle, but different material. So here's in the, oh goodness, I forgot the name. These needles here that have these little teardrop tips is what I knit these on. This one I knit with bamboo needles. See the difference in size? It's quite drastic, actually. I did knit this brim a row. I started it a row earlier than I did on the other ones. It's still all connected. It's not like I did an extra row of ribbing. I just started the color further up in the hat. But because the size was different when I put the nose on, I had to actually put it onto the beard rather than right up along the top like I did in this one where it's right up at the top. It was just simply too large. You wouldn't have seen the nose. I would have had to have knit a different nose, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted them all the same size. So that is the final in the three sisters. Again, I will put a picture at the end that shows all three, as well as, again, the three sisters and the one that this one is particularly going to, which happens to be my Nana. And so I'm excited to get these all to them. They should have them on Thanksgiving. I only have to mail one. The other two I'm delivering in person. So hopefully they'll be there for Thanksgiving so they can be ready to decorate come December. Or whenever they decide to start decorating. Last up in the project update section, we're going to be talking about some mitts that I'm knitting as a holiday gift, and this is the yarn that I'm using with that. Chicken Lady Fiber Arts in her DK Sock line. That's the name of the actual base, is just DK Sock, in the colorway Blurple, which is the same colorway as the Warding Spell shawl, but there is a difference. This is the Surma Bamboo. This is the DK Sock. Different fiber contents take color differently, so they show up differently, as well as just different dye lots themselves. But that's something to keep in mind when you're ordering. If you're doing for a large project, order it all at the same time. That way you can be assured of the same dye lot. That way the colors match. This didn't matter, so I actually like getting to see different colors throughout. So I was really excited to see that. I do have some points I want to talk about on these mitts, which I'm, again, just going to talk about. I can't show anything because they do watch my channel. first off, I made notes on where the different sections start so I can compare it against the original mitt to the one I'm currently knitting. I do not block, if there's going to be multiple things, I do not block them until both are finished. Just so I can compare lengths to that, because sometimes the row gauge is slightly different, and rather than knitting to a certain number of rows, I may just knit to a certain number of, say, inches, so that way it appears the same, even though the rows are actually different. The first mitt took 32 grams of yarn, and this was out of a 100-gram skein. I also, the pattern called for make one rights and make one lefts, which I will be doing in a Swatch Lab, but that's just a style of increase. I do not like those because they're very fiddly for me to execute, so I don't like those. I use a lifted increase, which I will be going over in another Swatch Lab. So let's just dog trail for a second. This next Swatch Lab is cables. The one after that is make ones, and the one after that is the lifted increase. Just so everyone's aware, that's what's going on. I don't want to have them gapped way out. I'd like them relatively close. So I substituted the make ones for lifted. That gives me a slightly different look. I am okay with that, because I was knitting this one relatively close, but I was allowing myself to make allowances. So, as my previous video mentioned, I am not knitting incorrectly because I have a different goal in mind than what the pattern showed. Not knitting incorrectly. So that is a look at the mitts. I'm excited to get them done. I have decided that at the end of the year, when all of the recipients have their Christmas gifts, I will do a segment in my video of just the different pictures of the projects and hopefully the recipients wearing them. So look for that at the last video of this year. I figured that would be a nice way to wrap up my first season of Knit Bits, as well as the holiday knitting season. So look forward to that. Next up in Knit Bits, we're going to be taking a look at some new needles of mine. I have them in this small jar right here, and let's get those and take a look at those. So first off, I'm going to take out the existing needles and the yarn wand, because I want to prove a point. Okay, so this is an 8-inch needle, and this is a 7-inch, okay? So there's, 1 inch difference. Here is my new needles. These are 5-inch needles. And I even have, for comparison, and I'm going to show this again in the overhead, but just for the sake of talking, that is a toothpick compared to them. So these are small needles used. You can knit these in the round. In fact, I knit the mitts with these short needles. You also will use don't have to, but you can use this on socks or small dimensions. A lot of people like to use these for the fingers of gloves because they're small and they don't tangle in the way. Some people will use these as a cable needle. More on that in Knit Bits number 21. But there's a lot of uses for these little bitty guys. I do like these. These are just bamboo, and I have sizes from 2.0 millimeter, or a US, that would be a US 0, to a 5 millimeter, which would be a US 8. Again, I'll talk about this more in the overhead, but I just kind of wanted to gloss over and take a look at some tiny needles I bought myself and just stored them in this little mason jar. So let's switch to the overhead and take a look at these needles a little bit more closely. I want to talk about these tiny needles. I'm not going to go super in-depth on them because there's not a whole lot to talk about, but these are 5 inches. Here is compared to a toothpick. I wanted to point out something here. When I say tiny needles, I mean tiny as in the circumference. And I can show you what this particular needle is. This is a 2.25, and this is called a needle gauge. And you take your needle and you just start poking it through the holes, and the needle size will only go through, or the needle is the size of the smallest possible hole it can go through. So it can't go through that, so it's not a 2.0. So 2.25, it goes into that one. So this is a 2.25 needle. That is how you use a needle gauge. But I wanted to show you, let me see if I can find one in here, because it starts at a 2 in here, right here, 2 millimeter. And I know it because it actually says 2 millimeter, but I'm going to show you. And I push it through and the 2 millimeter section, and it fits snug. Okay, so that's the 2 millimeter. This is the toothpick that I used. I thought, you know, just for a fun little experiment, I would send this through and see which size it is. And a toothpick is a 2 millimeter. So when I talk about tiny needles, I'm talking about in circumference. When I say small needle, I just mean in the overall length. So I bought me a set of small needles that range from tiny to a US 5 or an 8 millimeter. This one happens to be a 4. But I just wanted to show you, needles can go down all the way to a 1 millimeter, which is a US 0.00000, or 5 zeros. 5 zeros. So they go down to a 1 millimeter. This is a 2, and a US 0. So there's 4 needles smaller than these. And it goes all the way up to a 25 millimeter, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong. I will put the information down here at the bottom, which is a US 50. So I just wanted to talk about these new needles that I bought for myself, and I can't wait to use these. Again, I have used these. I'm using the 4.5 millimeters to knit my gloves, which I mentioned in the overhead on the glove section. But I just wanted to show you these small needles, which again refer to length, as well as tiny needles, which are these 2.0 millimeter, which means, and it's the same size as this toothpick, so you can use toothpicks to knit. I have done it myself. I have used toothpicks as various other tools in my knitting, but if you wanted to, you could knit something with a toothpick. And I just thought that was a cool little tidbit to mention in this week's video. In the next little bit that I want to talk about some future plans that I have. Not for the channel necessarily, but just for myself in general. I set up and was looking at some different projects that I want to do next year. And I was just kind of jotting down as it come to me, oh, you know, I'd like to work on this, or I'd like to work on that, and the yarn I'd like to do, and so on and so forth. And my list kind of was growing a little bit longer. So what I decided to do was I made a spreadsheet that showed all of the projects that I want to do in 2023, the type they were, when I wanted to get them started, the yarn I was going to use, the colorway, the needle size, the designer, all of that. And so I made a spreadsheet, and I even color-coded it. So my plan is each month I will start probably one large project and work on that throughout the month. And then when that month ends, if I'm not finished with that project, it goes and becomes a UFO, and we return for finish in February. I don't have to finish it in that month, but I do want to at least start it and work on that. I really enjoyed working on a single project throughout the month of October with the Warding Spell Shawl, and how much more progress I made than jumping around from project to project. I still worked on some gnomes in October because I had someone ask for some. And then, you know, like if I go to doctor's appointments or whatever and I take the sock or whatever with me, that's fine. But I wanted basically one project. All of these others don't count in my mind as projects, because especially the socks, there's no time frame on those. Those are strictly away from the house knitting. So they are a project in the grand scheme of things, but in my mind they don't count as a project because there's no, I need to have this done so I can use these. It's just a fun little side project. I am not rigidly set on these exact projects have to be done this exact way throughout the month of 23 and there's no variation. I am a person that I would rather make plans and them change than no plans at all and just kind of go willy-nilly. I would be more surprised if my plan for 2023 did not change than if it did change. That's just the way real life is, and I'm okay with that. But I did want to tell you about it, and I'm going to show you a picture at the end of this little segment of my spreadsheet. And next year I may walk through what the parts are in each little thing, and go along that way. But I wanted to put this on for posterity's sake to say this is my plan, and we can see how that evolves and how that changes throughout next year. Yes, it's only November, but again, I'd rather make plans and them change, so I'm already thinking forwards because I've already got the rest of this month and next month's knitting planned, so that leaves next year to think about knitting. So look forward to more of that, and again, I will show a picture here at the end of this segment if I can get it all in one frame. If I can't, then obviously there will be no picture because I don't want to put up segments of it. That wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. So that is my plans for 2023 as far as knitting projects go. I want to take a moment and talk about patience. That is something that I'm not generally good with. I do have my moments, and how that can affect your knitting life. I talked about in a previous video, it's been a few videos back, and I will link to that video down below, where I was working on my limit cardigan, the one I'm knitting in honor of my late grandfather, and how I found out that I was knitting the wrong size. And that was really frustrating because I'd been working on that since before even the Knit Bits video started. So it was upsetting, and so it before I did anything else, it just went off and became a UFO, and I figured I would figure out what I wanted to do and move forward on that with the plan of frogging it and completely restarting it. I don't mind doing that because I'd rather it be done correctly than necessarily quickly. There are exceptions to every rule, but on something that's a memorial, I'd rather it be correct. But I did put that off to the side because a knitter recommends, rather than completely frogging a project, putting it off to the side and picking up a new ball of yarn and starting with that. Then you can work with the yarn from the original project. You can work that into it. That way all your work isn't just ripped out from underneath you and you restart. Another reason for that is you've got your original project, you cast on for the new project, or the new piece of it, it's the same project, cast on a new sub-project, and you're knitting along, and this one ends up messing up, and this one was more correct. You can then frog that one, and you still have your original. You're not starting completely from scratch twice. So that's what I did with the limit cardigan. It just became a UFO, and I figured I would figure out what I'm going to do with it later. I had ordered buttons, and they were a bit larger than what I had anticipated, but that wasn't a bad thing. I actually liked that they were larger. It would become more of a focal point for that sweater, because it's just garter stitch, so there's no like cables to draw the eye. It was these buttons, which were made from coconut shells. So I was just kind of, I wasn't even thinking about the limit cardigan. I was just kind of sitting there knitting and just thinking in general. My mind was kind of wandering. I was probably watching YouTube or Netflix and just kind of mindlessly knitting, which is my preferred method of knitting. because of this instance here, your mind can just kind of wander and sort things out. And I decided that I was going to embrace this limit cardigan exactly as it is and just knit a, hopefully, oversized sweater. I don't know what it'll do to my morale if I'm mentally preparing for it to be like 2 or 3 sizes larger and I wear it and it fits me correctly. I'll cross that bridge when it gets there. But I am glad that my past self decided, let's just leave this in place and be patient and figure out what we want to do with this, because my current self and future self is excited for now this oversized sweater. It is going to be worn over other clothes, so oversized is a plus already in cardigans. I personally don't like form-fitting and close-fitting garments. I'd rather them be looser. That's just the way that I personally prefer things. So I'm looking forward to this oversized sweater and what that future holds for that. So I'm very glad that I embraced some knitting patience and set it off to the side and let my brain kind of mull it over in the background when I wasn't even actively thinking about it, and come to a solution of, I'm going to keep working exactly like it is and just shoot on through. Not only because I'm going to embrace the oversized sweater that was very common in like the 90s, which I am a child of the 90s, so that kind of has a little bit of nostalgia to it, as well as I have a lot of this yarn that I'm using for this, and I would love to be able to eat it up because it's just worsted weight acrylic yarn that I have no other plans for whatsoever. So if it can be eaten up in a project, so much the better. And then that'll be a more manageable size, and maybe then my brain can figure out what I want to do with it. Maybe design a brand new shawl. We'll see. But everything, for me, I try and look at its multi-purpose. It's not a unitasker. I'm making this sweater, so I have a sweater. I'm making this sweater to have a sweater in honor of my grandfather, and I'm eating up yarn, and it's an experience and a way for me to remember him. So there's multiple facets to this sweater, and for me, when it comes to knitting, I would rather things be multifaceted than just, I knit this strictly utilitarian, I just need the project, I don't care about any other facts of it, I just want the project. And that's perfectly fine if that's the way you want to do it. That's just not the way that my brain tackles my particular knitting career. And to each their own. You are in charge of your knitting, and you get to choose how you want to look at it and the approach you want to take to it. There are no wrong answers, and there are no blanket right answers either. Each thing is different. So if you come to this point where stuff isn't lining up how you want to, before you just frog it and rip it out, unless it's on a time crunch and it's a gift for somebody, in which case none of this applies. But if it's just for you and you have the time, take the time and put it off to the side and start a brand new project, not a new sub-project, but a brand new. If you put the sweater to the side, knit a totally different sweater, or knit a scarf or a hat or socks or whatever. Knit something completely different and come back to it later with a fresh mind, and you may find that you really do want to keep going with the way you're going. And you may not want to frog it, in which case that's fine. But get some patience, because more often than not, a decision made in the heat of the moment with emotions running high sometimes tends to end up in regret. So practice some knitting patience with me, and let's see what happens. Last up in my talking section, I want to talk about something that I talk about a lot, and for whatever reason I don't apply it to myself, and that is swatch. And then the other part to that is pay attention to what the pattern says. Will solve a lot of problems. I just talked about how the limit cardigan was knit too large. Had I paid attention to the pattern and swatched correctly, that would not have happened. However, it was serendipitous in this particular circumstance. But that's not always the case. And I've got a good example of that. When I knit the sample swatch for Chicken Lady Fiber Arts, when she asked me to sample her yarn, and I did that, I was not paying attention. There was no pattern. I just did this freestyle, and the whole thing was a swatch. But I did not pay attention when I grabbed needles from my big thing back here. I grabbed 2 different sizes of needles. They were just one size different, so it doesn't make a visible difference in this case. When I was doing the swatch for these Christmas gift knits, or birthday gift knits rather, birthday gift, not Christmas, I grabbed needles and I started swatching. I was swatching in the round, which is what you do if you're going to be knitting in the round. So I was doing that correctly. I cast on a bunch of stitches, so I had a wide section to measure from, which is important because you can kind of average out and get an average much better. And I knit this sample. I knitted about that far, which was plenty for what I was doing. And went to measure gauge. Unblocked, but still went to measure my gauge, because generally I measure my gauge before I block stuff. That's just the way I do it. It's a little bit fast and loose, but more often than not it has worked out for me. Up until I started doing these knitbit videos, and then everything just went to the wind and no rules apply anymore. But I measured my swatch and it was vastly different from the pattern. So I went back and looked at the pattern, and it showed an entirely different size needle than what I had grabbed. I don't know what I was thinking. So I grabbed the correct size needles, knit my gauge swatch. I didn't rip out, I just put a bit of waste yarn so I could check, and just continued knitting. Then I also had something to compare, because I may have decided that I wanted to knit a different project with that same weight yarn and those same needles, and I can check and see what it is that I've got. A little bit of forethought goes a long ways. So I just continued the swatch from there and knit, and I still got the wrong size. And I was like, okay, well, bump up the needle sizes again and swatch, because it says use these needles or needles needed to obtain gauge. So I jumped up to a different size needle, knit, and I got the gauge. The pattern, if I remember correctly, was for 3.75 millimeters. I don't know what the US is offhand. I will put that down here at the bottom. I originally started with a US, or a 3.5 millimeter, which was too small. So I jumped up to the needle called for, and it was too small. I did not have a 4 because I was swatching magic loop rather than double pointed needles, because I thought I was going to be knitting magic loop, which is a style of knitting in the round, which I will talk about in a separate video. But it is just a method of knitting in the round. So I ended up having to jump past the 4 because I didn't have one, and up to the 4.5, and that was the size that I did actually need to get gauge. So apparently in this scenario I was a tight knitter. I'm not usually a tight knitter. Usually I'm pretty much on. But, you know, things change. Time of year can affect gauge on if your hands swell or whatever. That can change gauge. Different needle material can affect gauge. A lot of things can affect gauge. So take your time and swatch. And I did wash and block the swatch, and then checked gauge again, and I did still need that size needle. So take time and swatch, and take time and pay attention to what the pattern actually says to do, so you're not wasting your time saying, it says use this size needle, and you're using one either vastly smaller or vastly larger as your first attempt. You know, I don't count it as wasted time because I love knitting. I like to knit while listening to an audiobook or watching TV, whether it be something on Netflix or some streaming or YouTube or whatever. I like to do multiple things at the same time, and so I don't count it as wasted time. I was knitting and I enjoyed myself and everything was okay, and I learned something, and I wrote down my gauges for those needle sizes and put that in my project notes on Ravelry for these mitts, so that way, again, future reference, I can look back and see what it is that I got with this. I may actually put that in the notes also on my stash section on Ravelry. Ravelry, again, being a website database that you can record your projects, your stash, your needles, patterns, and a bunch of different useful things. Not everyone has the ability to use Ravelry. There's been some changes with stuff. But just take time, swatch, and pay attention to what the pattern says. Everyone recommends when you go and start doing a pattern, before you cast on, before you swatch, just read through the entire pattern. You don't have to understand the entire pattern, but just read through the entire pattern. Then you do your gauge swatch, and then you cast on. And then when you get to the section, you're like, I don't know what this is, you're not thrown out of left field. You not only can research that bit of the pattern, but you can also understand that bit in the entirety of the pattern, which will help tremendously. So swatch and pay attention to what the pattern says. It'll help you all the time. So learn from my mistakes, and hopefully I will start paying attention to my own advice and I won't wind up in these scenarios. But just take a moment. Knitting can be carefree, and you're supposed to enjoy your knitting. And so if you're one to get upset when you make mistakes, swatch and pay attention. If that doesn't bother you, then you're enjoying your time knitting and everything's okay. So take everything I say with a grain of salt. If you are an entirely different personality, the rules may not apply to you. And if you're the exact same, maybe you can learn from my mistakes. So that's what I have in the swatch and pay attention segment. To wrap up this week's video, we did a Swatch Lab with 2 separate swatches. We talked about 4 project updates. 2 I showed and 2 I merely talked about. And I had 4 just jibber jabber topics to talk about. Last week's video was one of the smallest videos I've made. And it got a lot of views. I don't know if that's because they were smaller. One person did comment that they did like the larger size videos because that gave them more time to knit and feel like they were in a conversation. We'll see what this video does. Each one's different, but the point is that this is supposed to be an enjoyable time and hopefully to learn something, which is usually how I end my videos, with hope you enjoyed this video and possibly even learned something. It is also how I start my video, so it is important to me that you enjoy and learn something along the way. This video I had a lot to talk about and not a whole lot to show overhead. There was a few spots, but I hope you enjoyed this video and possibly even learned something. And until next time, keep knitting.